distinguished guests, panelists, and our online viewers as well. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today at our Alef Talks session here at Dubai Guest Pavilion. Along with the panelists, we will be discussing today how education providers are combating non-traditional learning adoption challenges among students and communities. My name is Rudayna Abdo. I look after the marketing department of Ed.D, and I would like to present to you and welcome our panelists for today. We have Mrs. Rudayna Abdo. Mrs. Rudayna is the founder of Thaki. She's driven by her passion for education to refugees and disadvantaged children, and that's why she founded Thaki. It's a non-profit which was created to help educational organizations provide motivational learning opportunities to refugee children through e-learning and digital literacy tools. In her previous life, for more than 20 years, Rudayna was an urban planner, envisioning, managing, and tailoring solutions to challenging housing, land use, and urban transportation issues across urban geographies. Welcome. We also have Dr. David Taylor. He is a managing partner and the executive vice president at Framework Consulting, all the way from the US. Mr. Taylor designs, develops, and directs the implementation of the day-to-day operational processes, and he helps clients achieve educational business goals. He also creates new educational offerings for K-12 guides and conducts effective training programs for them and for their staff members, and helps them plan and determine long-term school improvements, leadership development, and project grants and enterprise management initiatives to accomplish their goals. Welcome, Dr. Taylor. And also we have Mr. Geoffrey Alphonso, the CEO at Alef Education. Mr. Alphonso is an avid technology enthusiast and a thought leader in the EdTech space. He is passionate about driving future education models that engage, inspire, and motivate learners. He is driven to use the latest technology as an enabler to help teachers, students, and school leaders drive improvement by using data to impact decision making. Welcome.
Thank you.
Last but not least, allow me to welcome John Russell, the Director of Education at Alef Education. John is an award-winning, accomplished K-12 digital domain publisher and senior leader with more than 15 years of strategic operational expertise and leading positions, responsible for the design, development, and delivery of international curriculum and local standards-based instructional content that is produced by large multinational teams for the private and public sectors. Welcome, panelists, and thank you for being with us today. Without further ado, the EdTech space has been progressing at an extremely rapid pace over the past few years. In order to provide learners, educators, and communities with the highest quality of education and the most effective and efficient experience. However, traditional learning has been the dominant method of teaching for a very long time, all across the globe. In many cases, it's difficult for students and teachers to adopt and adapt to non-traditional learning methods and tools. In today's discussion, we will dive deeper into the core of these challenges and what EdTech providers, such as Alef Education, are doing to ease the adoption of non-traditional learning. And additionally, we will also understand the real issues that students and the education community are facing when dealing with EdTech solutions and tools. So I will start my first question with Mr. Geoffrey Alphonso. I would like to ask you, you've been in the EdTech field for a very long time now, and your extensive knowledge and experience brings a lot to the field as well. So what do you believe are the most important factors driving the education sector towards utilizing EdTech tools to instruct curriculum and deliver teaching?
Thank you, Reem, and welcome, panelists. I think, to your point, when you talked about the EdTech sector and kind of the rapid rise, today this market stands at close to $250 billion and is going to grow compoundedly in the next 4 years to almost $600 billion. I think the key factors is really looking at tools that really that are put at the forefront of creating love for learning for learners. Tools that are going to be easy to use, tools that make it efficient for teachers to teach, as well as creating technology that allows learners to reach their potential through individualized and personalized learning. I mean, I think at Alef, we've tried for the last few years working with our schools to cater technology really with the needs of students, teachers, even parents in mind, to try and connect that whole ecosystem through data. I think those are fundamental pillars. And I think one of the most important ingredients is also the amount of work you do and this is probably something Dr. David will agree with me on, is the professional development of teachers, how to embrace and leverage technology to get the best out of their teaching styles with their learners in class. I think those are very, very important factors.
Thank you, Mr. Jeff. And I definitely agree, customizing, especially at tech tools, is one of the key essential, I think, factors that delivers those tech tools effectively to the students. My following question is for Mrs. Abdo. Vulnerable communities are usually at the heart of EdTech challenges, and due to the lack of EdTech tools, let alone education itself sometimes, these learners are in non-traditional learning settings as well. So how do organizations such as Thaki empower them with technology for education, and how do they ease them into learning through these new tools that they have never been familiar with before?
Thank you, Reem, and thank you for having me here. Very much to point, because that's exactly the space that we're dealing in. Disconnected communities, maybe entirely out of education, no access to potentially electricity, internet, and very basic living conditions in which they live. So introducing technology has its many challenges. We mostly are operating in Lebanon, and our model brings the devices through a circular economy model of repurposing the hardware. So we establish, in our case, essentially computer labs within the organizations, and now we're starting to work on solar, trying to enable bringing solar power because of the power issue in Lebanon. So first of all, to get past the barriers of the teachers who don't have the skills and the tools or don't have the understanding of how to utilize digital. So that's the first barrier that we're trying to help the teachers come across. And then the children, they embrace, and they are very quick at adopting and adapting and embracing the technology. So it's and bringing in the tools in a way that operates. We bring in all of our educational content from content education experts that are preloaded on the devices. So there's no need for internet connectivity, which is, you can't get the bandwidth, it's unaffordable, it's very difficult to access. And connecting otherwise through mobile phones through WhatsApp and platforms, it's in a minimal aspect. So lots of challenges, and COVID really highlighted all of these difficulties of connectivity as well, not just in the communities that we work, but across the globe.
Yeah, and I think it triggers organizations such as Thaki to be creative in the ways of delivering and getting these tools and methods to these communities to help them in the best way, reach or access education. So thank you for that. We can see that also happening in the UAE schools as well, but not when it comes to technology, to connectivity and all of that, but in terms of adoption and getting the students on board with the education tools. Mr. John Russell, after being in the education field for many years now, what do you believe educators should keep in mind and emphasize on while designing digital, educational, and instructional content for schools and institutes that are new to the EdTech space?
Thank you very much, and welcome, and thank you. Thanks for having me today. Well, I think I'd like to perhaps take a contrarian view and say that when thinking about content, we probably don't start with the content itself. So we probably want to think more in terms of what are the objectives in the school, what are teachers there to do, what are students there to do. And generally speaking, I think companies approaching the use of EdTech perhaps for the first time, or the use of technology tools in class, need to perhaps think in terms of pacing and mastery. So by pacing, we mean what is the content that students need to work through, and how is that planned, how is that presented by the authorities, for example, the curriculum authorities. And on the other hand, students also need to develop proficiency in the subject by use of that content. And what EdTech businesses try to do, I think, is to bring those two domains together and aim for the sweet spot in between, where students can follow whatever the instructional plan is by using the EdTech tools and achieve the mastery that they're aiming for. And at Alef and here in the UAE, what I've noticed generally is that in schools, the conversation is all around how can we keep our students in that center ground where they're using the tools they need and they're achieving the outcomes that are set. for them. So I think companies approaching or schools approaching EdTech for the first time perhaps would think in terms of that diagram, if you like, and then approach, well, how can content best serve our objectives if that's our ultimate aim? So
yeah, I think that's a holistic approach to come at it through. Thank you for that. Dr. David Taylor, you deal with educators and school leaders who struggle with their students' usage of technological and modern learning solutions almost on a daily basis. So what are the key areas that they deem as the most important in order to improve and foster higher EdTech adoption and effective learning for their students?
Well, I can speak to North America and much of the world who has moved past the point where access is a problem. Most of the schools that I deal with on a regular basis have good internet access. They have access to devices. And the challenge then moves to teachers and how those teachers take that technology and how they use that to improve student performance and how to excite students with instruction. Sounds simple, but it's really not. One of the things that the research shows us is that teachers need good leadership from the principal, from the school administrators, and they need space to actually experiment and try and succeed and fail. Because if a teacher does something for the first time, sometimes it's not successful. We have to understand that it's a learning process for teachers just as well as it is for students. We also need to remember that most of the students in North America, at least, are digital natives. They've grown up with this. And so they take to it like a duck takes to water. Teachers, many of them now, are the beginning leading edge of those digital natives. And so they're beginning to demand that they be given the space to actually experiment and to develop good lessons. One of the challenges that teachers have is how to take a piece of technology that is delivering content and how to change the pedagogy in their classroom and the way they teach so that it's effective. The other challenge is around leadership, where principals need to know what it looks like to be successful integrating technology and integrating content into a classroom successfully. Just because you go by a classroom and you see a room full of kids working on a computer does not mean teaching and learning is happening. It means that people are busy. And so principals need to be able to give authentic feedback, and school administrators need to be able to give authentic feedback to teachers about how to improve what they're doing in the classroom, not just walk by and go, check, they're using the computer today. That's not the goal at this point. The other piece is teachers struggle with content because the world is filled with content now. And so finding content that's been vetted, that's credible and reliable, takes time. Teachers need time to identify that content, integrate it into their lesson. If the content's not delivered through a textbook series or through other official channels, if they're going on the internet to find things, it has to be vetted. They have to say, is this really going to do what I need it to do if I use the technology to present this material? So I think that's important. And there are lots of organizations now that provide content. Alef provides content for teachers. I'm on the board of a nonprofit that provides content to teachers called it's Teachers First, and Source for Learning. It really provides content that teachers have vetted and they feel is good to use in a classroom, and so it's peer reviewed. I think that this will continue to evolve over time, and teachers will become more comfortable with technology in the classroom. But we're no longer at the beginning. We're kind of in the middle of that adoption process.
And I think, teachers, as you mentioned to your first point, are always lost in the formative for success. We don't focus on them as much as we should. And I think at Alef Education, we do a really good job with this, especially during the onboarding of the process of schools. We do a really, thorough training program for them where we make sure they're onboarded. But I believe, yes, a big amount of focus should be spent there.
One thing that we all need to keep in mind is That minute in the classroom where something doesn't work is the most expensive minute in the entire education process, because that's a minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes that students aren't learning. So it's really important that what you do works.
Okay, so yeah, Mr. Alfonso, what are some of the other factors when it comes to EdTech that you think can actually contribute to the ease of difficulty of non-traditional learning adoption? Things such as product features, training and onboarding, like I mentioned, anything else that comes to your mind that you think can ease that transition?
We just witnessed what happens when technology fails us and the panic that goes through the room. And I think just to build on to what you're saying, I think having technology that's available and accessible, just to build on what Dr. David was saying, is so important. And we put a lot of effort into that in terms of driving that experience to schools, in terms of having the right infrastructure. Obviously, we know technology has to advance a lot to make it more accessible to areas like Rudayna is, proudly servicing, but hopefully it'll catch up. I think in terms of other factors, we talked about teacher training, but I just want to echo again, that is so fundamentally important. And one of the things that we do, as Dr. David mentioned, looking at the classroom and seeing kids on a device doesn't mean, hey, they're using EdTech, everything's great. It's how do you really ensure that they're getting the best out of the technology? We've seen classes where kids look like they're on a device, but actually they've got the headsets and they're listening to a video or watching a movie. Right. So there's so many different classroom management practices that you have to kind of employ and work with teachers in terms of being able to, you'll catch some things and some things you won't. Kids are, generally, like you're saying, digitally native. They know how to game the system. But if you're creating experiences that are truly engaging for them to learn, hopefully you'll be able for them to want to basically, watch a video or learn some level of digital content and basically go through the assessment. And we spend a lot of time at Alef working with students in that regard, because it's so important. We've been working with government schools predominantly here in the UAE for the last 4 years. All basically middle and high school Ministry of Education schools use this program. And one of the key things that we've seen is continued adoption year on year, which is a very positive sign in terms of that stickiness that resonates with learners. Typically, if you look at the history of EdTech products out there in the market, typically you'll find 10 to 15% adoption, probably for two factors. One, kids just get bored. Two, teachers are awfully trained once and then left. And a lot of times it becomes more for nuisance, it doesn't work, and they just forget it and go back to traditional means. So I think we have to look at it through a different lens. I think looking at it from a learner is very important to understand what really resonates with them. How do you really engage them? How do you really motivate them to want to learn? Like you said, they do today, in today's generation, love technology. But again, I think what we've also seen, and this is maybe an inflection point with COVID, there are so many tools out there. So a lot of times you get overwhelmed with what to use and how to use it, and is it making impact? And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to do now at Alef, is to actually study the evidence through research. Right? We don't want to be just a software provider that's providing technology. We want to say that the way we build lessons, the way we deliver instruction on our platform is actually making an impact to teachers and to students and to the whole education community.
Thank you. And I agree. I think even as EdTech solution providers, you need to learn, just as the students are learning in the classroom, you need to learn how to best deliver the tools and best improve your products. So thank you for that. Mrs. Abdo, you also work with teachers that help in providing education to refugees and students who had never had access to technology before. What outcomes and impact have they seen on their students as they start adopting and get accustomed to technology in learning and teaching?
Thank you for that. And I also want to pick up on the two previous points with the classroom setup and the learning environment and what the teachers have to deal with. In our case, it's often very overcrowded classrooms, 40, maybe 50 students to one teacher of varying ages, of varying education levels, traumatized students. So there are all of these challenges to come into in the first place. So it's how to support the teachers who themselves don't have that experience and the understanding of the knowledge, and getting them past these hurdles. So initially we were setting up these computer labs and let's see what happens. And that is not sufficient, because the barrier can remain closed for the children with the teachers. So now we're building a digital toolkit that's helping to help teachers get over these hurdles, figure out how to construct lesson plans, for example, educational tutorial videos, but short. These teachers are already so strained. They have so many different curricula to implement, so many programs. They've got so much pressure on their time. They're underpaid, they're overworked, they're working double shifts, and they have yet another component to implement within the learning. So the challenges are tremendous. Budgets are non-existent, and so how do you meet them in those scenarios? So these are the challenges, but the positive thing is we're seeing, and keep in mind that we're working in an offline environment, so we cannot collect the data, dynamic data, and everything comes through, whether we collect from the devices or surveys, and we can't survey the children either. So there are all of these limitations in place given the context of where we're operating. But what is coming through is that there is increased, huge, I mean, we're in the upper 80s, low 90 percentiles of feedback from teachers where they're saying the technology is making an impact on motivation, is helping children with learning disabilities, is keeping them more engaged. And because it's offline, it's also a more controlled environment. So you can't go down the YouTube loop or down these other tunnels. So that helps. We don't create the content, we go to content experts, so it's vetted content that comes from a good educational product that's engaging, that's personalized, and things like some of the feedback would be such improvement in English because they're watching programs that come from native speakers, so things like that. So there's a huge space for it, and the impact may not be at this point from what we're doing direct outcomes to direct learning outcome on core curricular, but we're seeing these tremendous impacts on the software elements that help, and that ultimately really help the teachers in classroom management. Yeah.
Thank you for that. If you don't mind, I just want to ask you to elaborate a little bit more, because you mentioned that you take your content directly from content providers. When you evaluate or assess the content, what do you usually look for in terms of, what they're offering, what's inside their product? If you can just elaborate a little bit more on that.
Thank you for that. And we're not focusing on core curricular content. There is some numeracy literacy content, but we've made the decision to really focus on the SDGs, digital literacy, mindfulness, things that are outside of this scope, and things that are more than likely the children will not be exposed to on a regular basis. Entrepreneurship. So we're making the decision to go on that supportive route to help the children. There is numeracy literacy content, yes, but we're not, and we're doing supplementary learning, complementary learning, not core curricular.
Thank you for that. Actually, my next question is to you, Dr. David, but before we get there, I have another question for Mr. John, if you don't mind me asking. When you are publishing content for digital and you're dealing with teachers and delivering those publications and digital content for them to use in their classrooms, have you seen the need amongst teachers and maybe school leaders for such kind of content that delivers, life skills, different approaches to learning that are not, English, math, science? If you can just tell us a little bit from your experience about that.
Sure. Yeah, the short answer is yes. Actually, I was so glad to hear you bring up the term data. I was resisting the temptation to. I'm glad you brought it up. But no, absolutely. Look, I think we've all seen the impact, for example, of English medium education in the region and in the UAE. And I think if the last 2 years has taught us anything, it's that grit and resilience and these types of characteristics have become really, really significant in the education setting for students. And let's not forget too the role of parents. So we haven't talked about parents yet today, but one of the interesting correlations we see in the way our platform is used is that where parents are heavily involved and engaged with their students' learning, that the student performance generally is higher. And I think we can probably make an assumption that if parents are involved, they're probably supporting their kids overcoming issues that arise from the students' well-being and those sorts of topics that you were mentioning. So short answer is yes. How do we respond to those as content creators, as an edtech business? That's another conversation. But I think one of the challenges for us in this industry is is stepping outside of the mainstream of teaching subjects, core curriculum, and realizing that actually life skills, should be given perhaps equal prominence. So I'm sure that my colleagues on the panel can tell us more about that. But yeah. So.
Thank you for that, and thanks for elaborating more on what teachers are also looking for, both you and Mrs. Rudayna. My final question goes to you, Dr. David. You also work directly with, as you mentioned, school principals, headmasters, and education leaders through the K-12 sector. What feedback have they provided that made them advocate for the use of technology in their classrooms? Why is it something that they want to see more of and they see the value in?
Well, as we talked about earlier, so many of the children now are digital natives. It's something that they just expect. One of the things technology allows us to do is to differentiate in ways that we've never been able to do that before. And so when you look at school leaders, and they want to make sure that while they want children to gain a year's worth of education for a year's worth of time and a year's worth of learning, they also want to provide students with the ability to accelerate, and they want to provide them with the ability for students who've fallen behind to catch up. Nothing has demonstrated this more than COVID has this year. If you want to look at what administrators are panicked about, at least in the United States and in Canada, we shut school down for 8 months. And so we have this, what we talk about now is this COVID learning gap. And we did all this virtual instruction. And it was a complete and utter failure in many cases because we never trained a teacher how to teach online. It was a new thing. People were experimenting. They were learning. Some students did great in it. What principals and headmasters and school administrators are looking for is a way to enhance learning so that students will stay in school, so they will be engaged in instruction, and so teachers can differentiate and help students not only remediate but accelerate. And that's what they're really excited about. And that's why technology is so important to them, because it's hard to do that without it.
I agree, definitely. And this is why technology is so important nowadays. And from your experience with the school leaders, have they gotten any feedback from the parents or from the teachers about the parents in terms of, supporting their kids or, asking them to continue to invest more time in educational learning through technology at home during the lockdowns and the COVID restraints?
Well, one of the things that you need to remember is parents send us the very best children they have. And that's really important to remember. And we have to take parents and students where they are. And we have to educate not just the child, but the whole family. So one of the things that principals, at least that I've talked to, the school administrators that I've talked to, they talk about this concept of not just educating the child, but educating the parents on how to help the child be successful. And that is community engagement. It's about building support in the community for not technology, but for education. And technology just is an accelerator in a way that principals can help do that. The other thing is if you take a product like the Alef product, where a student can go home and can actually get real robust instruction in middle school math, as an example. Some parents don't have any expertise in middle school math. And so this is a tool that a parent can use to make sure their child is successful. And so principals want to make sure that parents have access and understand all the resources that are out there to help parents be successful with not only with their student, but with their schools as a whole.
I agree. And I think we actually do love to include them in our platform as well, which is why we have the Alef Guardian app. It delivers real-time data of the students' performance to the parents directly on their mobile device. And I think this is a very, easy way to make sure that the parents are involved in their students or their children's learning and, their progress. And I think once they see their results, they become more invested into, knowing what's happening in the classroom. Why is my child falling behind, or why is he excelling in this subject as opposed to another subject where he's struggling? And so definitely keeping them included in the entire learning cycle of their children is key to this. Panelists, thank you so much for being with us today. The discussion was very insightful, thought-provoking. It has shed great light on the real difficulties that the education sector is facing, but more importantly, also what it is doing to solve these and ease the adoption of non-traditional learning tools in the classrooms. We hope that everyone found the session also very beneficial and have some questions for our panelists. So we'll be taking a few questions from the audience. Okay.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much. Using some of the comments that you mentioned in terms of having classrooms that are fully equipped with the right devices, might be with the right content, doesn't mean that learning is happening. It means that the class is very busy. Working on the area of data and the impact of data, real-time data, to inform all the people that are involved in the education, whether we are talking about education leaders, school leaders, teachers, learners, parents, to inform them of the way where they can build up a personalized learning path for the learners that are in classrooms. On this regard, Geoff, Alef is very experienced in that. Can you tell us more about the impact of data on education? Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. I think we're studying continuously the impact of data, not only with our own data science and some of the research folks we have within the organization, but also through external benchmarking, right? So, for example, students taking a MAP test, looking at grade level equivalency. This year we're working with the likes of Stanford Research to come and do like a joint efficacy study. So, we pride ourselves on being a very data-focused organization, using data to kind of drive whether it's personalized learning based on missing skills that students may have, which is really also related to having the relevant content or targeting the right information to parents, as we mentioned. It's not only maybe around assessment, but here's what your student was struggling with in school, so they could actually provide that targeted intervention even at home. So we believe that, as we kind of progress with all of these data points, we want to actually study them and actually publish. I mean, we have published around 10 peer-reviewed papers, and we're going to continue to do that because that evidence is really important to a future trajectory of where the company wants to go and being a global edtech player and driving impact for learners, students, and parents as well.
You spoke briefly on social emotional learning, its importance, and increasingly it's maybe just as important as the core subjects. How do you see that translating into, how can we teach that in edtech, in the digital space?
Well, all of us probably want to answer. I'll go first. One of the things that we're seeing across the internet right now is people misbehaving, people forgetting how to treat people when they're actually on the internet. So the whole social emotional learning piece now is expanding to how I treat people online and the ethics around that and the morals around treating people online. And what we have to do is translate how we would interact in person to be how we would interact together.
Yeah, thank you. And I think what we're seeing very much as well as a result of COVID is a huge level of depression amongst younger children of all levels, whether it's COVID lockdown in developed, highly connected places, and as well as obviously in the extreme vulnerability. And it's bringing that, all three forces of school, teacher, and parents having that involvement there. So I think there are a lot of efforts. We're actually involved right now in a product development of a very almost low-tech program to help the children, and the teachers can access it, and then the parents would know what to do in the home. But I think this level of emotional support, getting through these trauma and depression and being able to express it, identify it, and deal with it in all of these three scenarios is critical. And I think technology can help with that.
All right, testing. My mic is working. I think this is a question for Dr. David, and I wanted to pick up on something that you had mentioned about sometimes the points of resistance with American teachers. So we talk a lot about the engaged educators and the ones who are big proponents of technology and see the value. What are some of the resistance points to it? We had talked about the COVID closures and how a lot of teachers were teaching online and some were successful and some were not. And I wanted to ask what EdTech can do to help support those teachers in the sense of making them see the potential so it is not busy work. Instead, it is effective, it is connected, it is part of a community of learning.
So in the US, we have professional learning communities all through our schools. And where you have early adopters and people who have actually adopted and moved on, a great majority of teachers have done that. But then you have the ones that haven't. And we have that not just in teaching, we have that throughout lots of things. When we talk to teachers, one of the things that they feel is a fear of failure in front of their students. And so what we have to do is we have to make sure that we provide the professional development support to those teachers who are resistant to integrate EdTech into their classroom to show them that they can be successful. Showing someone a path to success through coaching, training, mentoring makes a big difference in how you move that last 30% to using technology. And they may not use it every day. We would like for them to use it often because we think it's engaging. But if we can get them just to have one lesson that's really successful, that success builds on itself and they will take more and more risk. I talked earlier about providing space for educators to take risks. If educators feel safe in doing that, especially that resistor group, then that's how you do more. And ed tech companies can help by providing high quality professional development. And when I say high quality, I don't mean an hour in the cafeteria after school when I'm tired. What I'm talking about is real professional development where you can teach me how to change my instruction, how to change what I'm doing so that I can be successful. I think that's what ed tech companies can do. And by the way, a lot of them do it really well. So.
So everyone has kind of touched on this, but the world is forever changed with COVID. We've talked a little bit about mental health, depression, and Rudayna, you talked about serving traumatized populations. So I'd love to hear from a few people just about how do we serve those populations specifically in dealing with their trauma or resolving trauma so that they can learn. So a lot of the research around adverse childhood experiences, so the ACE research shows that kids who are traumatized can't really learn as effectively, right? So Rudayna, specifically, you mentioned that you're doing entrepreneurship, mindfulness, these kinds of topics. So what are you noticing with the students and how are you helping them to move through or work through some of their trauma?
Thank you. We're actually just embarking now on a project, two-year project with TNO, a Dutch research organization that they have done a program in South Sudan with children on working young children, ages 5 to 8. And the issue is, in our approach with this project is not to actually, you don't talk about the trauma itself, but how to identify it and how to relate to it in a body, how to create a toy that then you can relate to and you can take this with you at any time, anywhere. So depending on the circumstances, it's not necessarily addressing the trauma itself, because teachers can't do that. They're not counselors, they're not therapists, they're not equipped to do that. But there are different interventions at different times where there is a counselor that can be pulled in. Yes, absolutely. But in these other scenarios that any teacher can bring into a classroom and adapt these low-level interventions, but more importantly, identification, and for the parents to identify when there is stress, what to look for, and how then the child can help relate to this and not addressing it directly, because that just gets deeper into the trauma and could get them into greater trouble. So it's going to be really interesting to see what comes out of it. And then just from our previous work, otherwise, with the gamified learning and interactivity, it's also provides a wonderful distraction. One of our content providers is National Geographic. And for me, National Geographic is probably what instilled the environmentalism seed in me when I was a young child. So to be able to bring that kind of exposure to the children is, in itself can be very relieving as well.
Thank you all for attending, and thank you panelists again for being here with us today and for your very nice and thoughtful discussion. We look forward to having you all with us again in the next Alef Talks, and please join us outside for a short networking session to meet everyone and talk more to the audience. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for attending.